I don't mean by saving greenhouse gases by using a liter in your car. I'm talking about lifetime emission. The lifetime emission calculations are still uncertain, but the scientists are starting to converge on the opinion that the current biofuels are not environment friendly. In other words, the net balance is rather negative, or at best neutral. And this is on environmental criteria. On economic criteria, I will talk about, because that's even worse. So, the second generation technologies which are being under investigation, which is lignocellulosic technologies, recycling and so on, are holding a lot of promise, because those may end up using land that would not compete for food production. But these are still at a very early stage, talking about 15, 20 years before these technologies become commercially viable. It's encouraging that if you look around venture capital circles, there is enormous amount of private research as well as public research going into these areas. And this is very encouraging, and of course one would expect that some of those will succeed. But anyway, we're still far away from that. Now, this is about the food prices. This is just a pattern of the recent food, and I don't want to elaborate very much. Now, it's interesting, there was a huge debate in our conference, and I think there's still a huge debate about what was causing the high food prices. Because the US was saying, for instance, that biofuels was a very small contributor to high food prices, while there were others that were saying it was as much as half. In fact, we heard some people saying that was as much as 80%. Well, the truth is somewhere in between, and it's not easy to disentangle those things because there is a combination of demand and supply factors. Nevertheless, biofuels did have an effect in the current upsurge in prices. However, these developments, of course, are not unique and they have occurred before, but of course now we have a different situation. Now, the situation with the current food prices is such that it will, and that's a different thing, it will not change very fast. The previous food crisis in the 1970s took 3 to 5 years and it was over, because supply took care of the increased demand. The current situation is different. Why? And this is a very crucial point that links energy to food crops. The current energy prices, very high oil prices, are creating demand for biofuels as substitutes. And this put essentially a floor on the prices of food commodities. In other words, those food commodities will not come down if these prices of oil continue to be high. What this means is that the stocks that have been depleted over the past 10 years would not be replenished anytime soon, because any spare production would go for biofuels and not for stock building. So chances are you're going to have two effects. You're going to have continued high food prices, and worst of all, continuous instability in those markets. And in fact, if you look at the data, and I don't have time to show you, the instability in food markets has increased a lot in the last few years. Now, biofuels do have quite a substantial impact on the prices of food crops, and this is just a graph that summarizes some results from one of the analyses that a colleague of mine has done. So, talking about using additional 10 million tons of one of these feedstocks for biofuels, you can see in the lower part of the table what impact it will have on average prices, and it can be quite substantial. Sugar, for instance, is 10%, maize is 3%, and so forth. So biofuels do have implications for keeping prices high, and let alone the fact that they give you a floor. These are our medium-term, just published about 2-3 weeks ago, the medium-term projections of food prices based on assumptions of an oil price of $100. Where is oil now? So these are underestimates of what is going to happen. Because if oil goes the way it is going, these are already outdated and they're going to be much higher than this. Nevertheless, the reason that this linkage that I was mentioning to you and this floor is important is because no matter how much ethanol or other biofuels you produce, they will not make but a very small contribution to total demand for gasoline, for instance. Here you can see the current and the projected share of ethanol in gasoline, and except in Brazil, which has the most efficient ethanol production in the world, there is no other country where you expect, even in 10 years, more than 10% share of ethanol in gasoline. For biodiesel, it's even smaller ones. So no matter what we do with current production, it's still going to be, and this means that the demand for energy is going to drive the demand for biofuels. So I don't want to spend too much time. There is some long-term factors. These are the results of our projections, namely under this current optimistic assumptions, the prices are going to stay high, and this of course doesn't say much about the stability, which as I said is going to be rather strong. So, the point that I'm making is that the structure of the energy markets now is affecting directly the food markets, and that's going to continue to be happening. And the climate change will affect the location and variability of agricultural production. Food prices are likely to increase. I didn't say anything. I had several graphs which I didn't put up there. There are estimates about the increased food insecurity of undernourishment in many parts of the world because of this. And this is likely to create tremendous problems of migration, security, and all these things. This is a global problem. This is not going to be just a localized issue. It's not an energy problem. We're talking about a veritable global issue and global crisis, which I think is going to get worse. And of course, this is the new market factor, is the biofuels demand. The one thing that I didn't tell you about is biofuel policies, because we had a whole special expert meeting on this, and the consensus, which is not articulated in government policies yet, is that all the current biofuel policies are inefficient. All of them. In other words, not a single first-generation biofuel except for sugarcane, ethanol production from sugarcane in Brazil. They are all based on subsidies. None of them is viable with a free market. So they're all based on subsidies. So we are subsidizing biofuels which, according to scientists, they're not leading to greenhouse gas reductions. So we are subsidizing basically warming of the planet. Now, this is